Before we join in today's session together, I think I should say a few words that when we get into this, you wonder what in Sam Hill's going on. Most people just want to know what this dietary supplement that I call New Eden will do for them. Frequently, people say, I've got diabetes, so will this help me? Well, the proper response in this country is to say only an FDA-approved drug can claim or represent to do anything for diabetes or a disease or a syndrome. But if the person says, I have a problem with the blood sugar being too high in my blood, which is a biomarker, we can respond to it and say, and we have evidence that more comprehensive nutrition supporting the code in DNA that controls cellular synthesis will make bioactive compounds that will normalize the biochemistry. The point I'm trying to make is that dietary supplements do not treat, cure, or mitigate disease or correct an abnormal condition by law. However, the preamble to the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act of '94, which is not the law, but only a statement of why hearings and the legislation was considered, starts out with the first paragraph, and I paraphrase, that science and medicine has determined that optimal nutrition is essential for good health, to prevent disease, and to restore health. You might quickly say, well, what more would you want from optimal nutrition? Well, you would want this statement to be in the law, because in the law labeling section, it very overtly expresses, and I paraphrase again, that in the United States, it's a law that only an FDA-approved pharmaceutical drug can represent or claim, treat, cure, or mitigate, or correct an abnormal dietary condition. So you must speak in terms of biomarkers. You might want to say, oh, I've got a diagnosis of multiple sclerosis. Well, have ever done anything for that? You can say, I can't respond to that question. However, if you have problems with the signaling in your nervous system to your muscles, and has this ever helped that kind of problem, we can talk about it because of the truth that is in the preamble to this legislation that created the dietary supplement industry. Now, from a practical standpoint, we'll be talking about different things today. One will be this book, Sastun, which I'll show you a copy of it later, about a village healer in Belize. It was believed to be the last village healer trained by the Mayan priests that built the pyramids of South and Central America. And we will get into that. But I read somewhere from Thomas Edison that he said, the physician of the future will not use drugs for disease, but will use electricity. But if you know anything about the controversies about Thomas A. Edison and Nikola Tesla, many people will say that Tesla was just a electrical genius who was only interested in showing that he could do different things with his inventions, but had no interest in the commercial value, but that Edison knew how to take it and commercialize it. So I bought the book, the inventions and speeches and patents of Nikola Tesla, and we will talk about some of it because recently I got a new biochemistry book that is called Life Redux by, I'll try to put it here, I think well, I can't get the author to show him it. I'll slowly bring it up. His name is A.S. NAIDU, which I think must be a by God blooming genius, because all former biochemistry texts that I have had, if you are familiar with this equation that's so often associated with Einstein, he said E equal mc squared. Well, the E stands for energy, the M stands for mass, and the C stands for the speed of light, which is a very large number, squared, which is an even huge number, to indicate that in a mass or a molecule or a compound, there's an awful lot of energy. Well, all the old books on biochemistry focused on mass or compounds that are present in nature, are made by the cells under control of the DNA and cellular synthesis. But this new book that I showed you, Redux, is focused on the energy and thinks of or presents that the life processes in plants and in animals, which has long challenged the mind of man. How did this ever get to come? Because if you look at the composition of matter chart, there are about 100 different elements, and each one of the little squares on this chart is a packet of stable energy. And I frequently point out that if I have here an artist's palette with the primary colors from which, by mixing them together, like you see blue and yellow there, will make green. You can make all the colors of the spectrum by mixing different amounts of these colors. Well, in the energy spectrum, you can make all the different compounds by what the code in the DNA does that can take totally lifeless elements. In Eureka, you can have plant or animal, which gets to human life. And so in this lecture, we're going to go from what I would say the foxholes and trenches of health down in Belize with Don Helio Ponte, who was trained by the Mayan priests, to Tesla. So with this background, which I only present to point out that there is ancient insight and wisdom that is up to 5,000 years old, that again and again has been presented, and that modern science is validating wisdom and insight that has been observed long before the scientific processes were even existed. So with that, we'll go to the lecture. This is the first slide of this presentation, and you will see that we'll go from the story of the book Sastun to statements by Nikola Tesla, which is very much in the modern discussions with the Tesla automobile. It's electric. And I will try to point out before we're through that energy and the frequencies of energy that come from the sun are very important in the life process. So we're kind of going from one extreme to the other when you go from Don Helio and Belize to Nikola Tesla. But the reason I'm doing this is there was ancient insight and wisdom based on empiric observations before science existed. And that's validated is misspelled, validated by modern science. Now, and among the ancient Greeks, Hippocrates, who's given the term Father Western Medicine, if you'll look into quotes by Hippocrates on the web, said if we could provide to the patient the optimal nutrition and exercise, quote, not too much, not too little, we have provided the safest path to good health. That was nutrition and exercise. And we have a series on the blue zones that the World Health Organization has pointed out where there are areas on Earth where people lived in good health to 90 to over 100. And the most fundamental thing is nutrition combined with daily activities or exercise. And then Hippocrates wrote, which something that has over and over again really challenged me, but he observed that let your food be your medicine and your medicine your food. And that when we held up the dietary supplement New Eden, that this is what I have now spent in my 36 years of trying to perfect. And by simple terms, the most simple terms, it's putting back into your diet what you used to get from the family garden and orchard when you allowed the produce to mature on the plant, which allowed the genes in the plant to put the nutrients that your genes call for to make bioactive compounds to run the process and biochemistry of life. Now, Hippocrates had a biographer by the name of Eustace, and I was so fascinated by those statements that I found out what he wrote, that his grandfather, his father, and two sons were all Greek physicians, and they all believed that disease and syndromes were caused by unhappy gods up on the Elysian plain, and we were down here on earth much like puppets controlled by the strings from above by the gods, and that if you had a disease or a syndrome, it's because there's some god up there unhappy with you. And so the Greek doctors saw the patient and says, this is mild or moderate or very severe problem, and you need to go to this various selections of temples and priests and make a contribution to make the gods happy, and you'll get over your disease. Well, Hippocrates rose up and did a group of autopsies and said, it's not due to unhappy gods up there. There's some bad things going on inside the human body. And he started a little medical school teaching this to young Greeks that wanted to be physicians. And the doctors of that time and the priests got together and went to the government, which is called the hegemon. Greece was a sort of a combination of a king and a general and high priest, and accused Hippocrates of defiling the dead, because in ancient Greece custom, the human body was precious and holy, and he had abused the body of something holy, and they accused him of this, and he spent time in prison. And that's why we have so many quotes from Hippocrates that are available on the web. But what I fell into with this research is that his statement, let your food be your medicine, medicine your food, it's very hard to get ahead of him in terms of what he observed. Also, to point out that he was a little late, that in Ezekiel 45:12 in the Hebrew scriptures from over 5,000 years ago, it ends with the leaves of the trees shall be for the healing or medication. And again, in Revelations, which is about the New Testament around 2,000 years ago, 22:2 ends with the leaves of the trees will be for the healing of the nations. Well, I didn't know these things when I started out, but I've been working 36 years with the leaves of the aloe vera plant, a desert lily. And the point I will give you these past quotation is that this village healer, Don Helio in Belize, who was taught by the Mayan priests, is in harmony with all the above statements. Now, Niccolo Tesla is quoted saying, if you to understand electricity is to understand the mind of God. Now, that three-letter word's thrown around a lot and has many different terms for it, but I like what Socrates of ancient Greece realized, that something very important is going on Earth and in the plant kingdom and the animal kingdom, which human beings were. And he says, whatever this power is, it's the prime mover of the universe. So I called it the creative, organizing, designing power that is active and is well demonstrated in the code of DNA, which requires an electromotive force, energy frequency, which I think is provided by the vibrations in water. You can't have plant or animal cells alive doing their thing or their biochemistry that is written in the DNA in the plant and the animal kingdom without an energy force, which I think is provided by oxygen with two hydrogen molecules that move things inside the cell for this DNA, and that the DNA has information to control cellular synthesis. Now, as I told you in the introduction, that Thomas Edison said that the physicians of the future would use electricity instead of drugs. And the fact that so many people say everything that Edison believed or thought or developed actually originated with Tesla. I tried to get his things to find out that anywhere in there you have anything about biology or health, and I couldn't find it. However, in an article in Scientific American that I read more than 30 years ago, it says that Bell Laboratory, I believe, is one of the Northeast major laboratories, purified chains of DNA from inside a cell and put them in an electrolyte solution in a chamber, and then put an induction fill around the cell with these chains of DNA. And by analyzing it, it had the properties of an integrated circuit with transistors in it. This I found electrifying because this is a introduction to the idea that I showed you, that E equal MC squared, that energy is very important in this farmer thing, because I look at myself as being trapped into the Newtonian universe of where you measure things in inches or meters, and you weigh things by pounds or kilograms, and that to get into energy is a real challenge. And I apologize that I'm not capable of addressing this, but the human body is run by electrolytes across the membranes inside the cell and between cells, and sodium and chloride, calcium and potassium and magnesium run the low current, DC current that runs all the activities of the biochemistry of the human body. Now, Nikolai Tesla also said that physics of the universe, energy, frequencies, electromotive forces, magnetism, and biochemistry are all involved in cellular synthesis. And this very quickly got, just before World War II, I believe it was Max Planck that got the Nobel Prize for this concept of quantum theory. And this has to do with this new textbook trying to explain the life functions in terms of energy. And I feel a certain amount of comfort that I found a quote saying that if someone tells you they understand quantum theory, and let me explain it to you, beware. They say no one understands the subject. And I'll be the first to stand up and say, this is above my head. As I say, I'm trapped in the Newtonian universe where most of us are. But Nikolai Tesla also said, if you wish to understand the universe, think of energy, frequencies, and vibration. So this textbook that I held up by A.S. NADU, that each element of the composition of the matter chart is a package or a quanta of stable energy. Biological compounds are the total package of the energy of each element. And we started out that all of this has to do with E equal mc squared, whereas the M is for the mass, which old textbooks talk about the biological substances. Well, NADU talks about the energy being transported across membranes within the cell and between the cells and in the organs. And of course, the C stands for speed of light, and you'll see there that it's 299,792,459 meters per second, or I can't handle figures that high, but it's 186,282 miles per second. So that means if you multiply the mass by that, you got a lot of energy. And if you doubt this, every time on TV you see an atomic bomb go off, you see one of the highest molecular weights on the composition of matter chart, instantaneously by a fuse composed of dynamite converted to energy, which makes a lot of heat and a lot of damage. Now, this is, we've shown time and time again, the stable elements are packages of energy. And the simplest is the hydrogen, which has a proton and one electron around it. And as you go to the right and toward the bottom, you get heavier molecular weights. And uranium is down there at one of the high ones, which is used to make the atomic bomb. But there's energy in each one of these little square packets of energy, and modern science is trying to move on to explain that the management of energy is part of the process of life. And I held up when we were talking about that the artists, it doesn't matter whether it's painting by the numbers or Leonardo da Vinci, they're all work with the primary colors and the mixtures of them to make all the colors of the rainbow. And that the organizing, creating power in the universe use this as essentially the artist's palette to make the greatest composition that's ever been matter, which is the universe, in addition to what's going on with Earth and our moon and sun and each cell within your body. Now, light comes from the sun. I just want to make a point that this thing about energy is very important. And if it's over my head and your head too, that light comes from the sun, which looks white. But if you run it through a prism, it will bend the different frequencies of that white light, and it shows those frequencies from the red down to the violet. And very important, right between the green and the blue there is a narrow band that comes from the sun that lands on the chloroplasts in plants, particularly in the ocean, one-cell plants. And the process of photosynthesis starts where carbon dioxide is converted to chains, which are the chains for amino acids eventually, for fatty acids, and even the carbohydrate chain of carbon to carbon bonds have a little bit of that energy from the sun that was captured by the chloroplasts. And this thing about energy is very important in life. And I think if you're going to rely on substances like dietary supplements, you should know something about the importance of what is going on, and that modern science, we're getting into a little here, is validating ancient insight and wisdom. And these are the wavelength frequencies of energy received from the sun's energy. And if you notice again there in the blue to the green right there is the area where photosynthesis hits the chloroplast to start. the energy on Earth. Everything that's having to do with life that starts out with this little band of energy coming from our sun. And the algae is eaten by the rotifers, or the one-celled plant animals, all the way up to larger animals. And of course, human beings are on land the highest predator. That everything eats something else to get its energy, but it all started from the sun. Now, in the chromosomes, the code there is made up of 4 different elements on that composition of matter pattern that is the code in DNA or our genes. And of course, it was a amazing thing to me. I never read it anywhere that the DNA code in the plant kingdom is just exactly the same as the DNA code of the animal kingdom, including human beings. And these are the 4 different elements that make up that code. And I think it's very similar to the primary colors of the energy that comes from the sun, whereas you can take red, blue, and yellow and modify them with white, and you can make all the colors that has ever been used to make great works of art. And this hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen is all the great works of the plant and animal kingdom that is written in the DNA. And that the chromosome is essentially a biocomputer. In this illustration here, there are 3 different ways they've tried to explain to understand how chromosomes control every cell in the animal kingdom and in the plant kingdom. In the blue is composed of phosphate molecules, which show the molecules in the center, and it's back to just blue on the far right, yes. And that the code is suspended in the gold there. They show like plates to the far right, or the actual little molecules of DNA in the center thing, and then just showing you that it's adenine always combined with thymidine, and guanidine always with cytidine. It's called complementary binding. But this is what runs your cells and requires nutrient molecules and cellular synthesis to make the compounds of life. And it all starts out with lifeless nutrients, and with this code that is in every living cell. This is in every cell of the human body. And there's, again, these are the 4 nucleic acid molecules that are used to make up that code, and the plates inside there that was yellow: adenine, guanine, thymidine, cytidine. If you'll notice, there are only carbon molecules, hydrogen molecules, oxygen, and nitrogen molecules to make up this code, much like the primary colors with white to modify it in the energy spectrum that comes from the sun. Now, I told you about the experiment I read in Scientific American, that the DNA change had the properties of an integrated circuit with transistors and the chromosomal change, which I found electrifying because it means that there is information stored in the DNA change, just like the lines of code that are in your cell phone or your desktop computer, or any of your type of computer that you have. So electric frequencies can activate an inactivated gene. In turn, this biochemistry of life is control. Now, this is the front of that book, of the most recent biochemistry book, that tries to explain life in terms of energy management, instead of former biochemistry texts that gave cascades, multiple steps of biochemical compounds that ended up in life. Now, I admit my limitations on trying to explain to you some of the most advanced ideas that are going on in science that validate the ancient wisdom that how important nutrition is. But now I'd like to tell you the true story of Don Helio Ponte, who was a village healer in Belize. And he was trained by the Mayan priests that studied the heavens and built pyramids in South America. And this is the book. And you see at the bottom a nurse from California with Don Helio, heard about him and decided her name was Rosita Vargo, thought that she'd go down in Belize and learn everything that Don Helio knew in about 2 or 3 years and write a book. Well, she ended up spending about 17 years, if I remember correctly, from the book. And here is the California nurse walking through the jungle with Don Helio. You notice it just barely comes up to her shoulder. And there is a facial picture of this nurse from California that went down there and wrote this book. These are pictures at the top of the inside of the hut of Don Helio. And in plastic sacks, he had things that he picked in the jungle that the Mayan priests taught him how to do, and dried them as leaves. And down at the bottom, you see Rosita actually processing some of the jungle leaves and barks and blossoms and seeds that Don Helio would collect in the jungle. Now, one of the things that caused her to stay more than 3 years, that when you were out in the jungle, the Mayan priest taught him a mantra or a prayer of thanksgiving from the creative power in the universe for providing this, that you give thanksgiving when you collected it. Then you learned another mantra or prayer while you're processing it to preserve the Sastun. That's the name of the book. Sastun means the spirit of the plant that is responsible for the healing, which through these mantras or prayers, you want to keep it going in the processing of the leaf. And then you learned another mantra or prayer when you made a tea with these plant materials when you give it to the patient. So there was a lot to learn because it was different for each plant and what you were going to use it for in the patient. Here you see him with his Don Helio with his pack on his back, and he's clipping different leaves and branches and things from in the jungle. Now, if that was just the story of why the nurse went down there, but in his hut, he had 2 sealed photographs. One was from the Queen of England, and one was from George Bush Sr., President of the United States. Both of them had in the handwriting and signature of the Queen and the President, thanking him for his contributions to world health. And there's a story behind the story of this, that under the President Nixon administration, they decided that cancer was a terrible thing in the country, so many people dying from it, and we should start a national institute to study cancer and develop a cure for it and to save lives. Well, in response to this, parents that had children with leukemia, people that had alcoholism and mental illness and autoimmune diseases and infectious diseases all said, well, what about us? And so before it was over with, they developed the National Institutes of Health. And each institute was focused on a different health challenge. Now, the next part of the story is that after about 10 years and over $10 billion had been in tax funds given to the National Institutes of Health, senators called the heads of particularly the Cancer Institute, up for hearings, and they said, look, here we've sent you all this tax money in the instance of the common cancers like breast cancer in females, prostate cancer in males, and lung cancer in both males and females is greater than it was when we first started giving you money. People don't live any longer with the treatments you've come up with. What did you do with the money we gave you? Why haven't you given us any results? Well, the scientists got the message. They got to get something that works if they want to keep getting money. So what they did is they got together for workshops and they said, well, what did human beings do in the past when there were no pharmaceuticals? And so they developed what they call ethnobiology teams that I first saw the article in Scientific American, where they had people on these teams that could read ancient languages, that people that understood the artwork that was done at the time. And oftentimes they had in there showing them thousands of years ago what they were doing with people with different kinds of problems. Well, one of these ethnobiology teams went down to Belize, and since Donna Helio Ponte was one of the last living known healer that the Mayan priests had trained, they followed him around in the jungle and made, every time he got some kind of plant, they would look at what kind of plant is this. Sometimes a biologist could say the Latin name for it, and they would dig it up, roots, and they took it back to greenhouses in London and greenhouses up in the Washington area to grow it up. And so this is why he had those two portraits of the Queen of England and George Bush, thanking him for the contributions he had made to world health, because one of these ethnobiology teams had gone down and spent some time with him in the jungle. Now, here he is at the end of the day. He's on his way back, and you can see his hut up there, a little higher ground. And he was walking along with the nurse, and he made this statement: I don't understand these scientists. They're looking for poisons. They want to poison cancer. That is not what I was taught. I was taught that one must fortify the sick body, not poison it, to foster healing and to restore health. And this nurse made the point, this diminutive little uneducated man, this village healer, who could not read, who had never read a book, never been in a library, never heard a radio or viewed television, had captured in his simple words the essence of the worldwide scientific quest to conquer disease. As he said, why would you look for something that was a poison? What you look for is something to fortify and strengthen the body. And I hope that you catch that everything that I quoted you before, going all the way back to the Hebrew scriptures through ancient Greece And in the Dark Ages, the father of pharmacology, Paracelsus, was quoted as saying that God put into nature everything that was needed to heal the body. The challenge of science is to find it. And Paracelsus took bark, leaves, blossoms. He dried them much like Don Heliopathy, and then he made a tea and had them to drink the tea. Then of the residual, he would burn it to an ash and have them to consume that too. And that was his version of, I would say, the oldest dietary supplements. He said that in the plants, what the body needs for healing has been provided by what I call the creative organizing and designing power in the universe. Now, I had an opportunity to attend a day of science held by the Council for Responsible Nutrition in Washington, D.C. in the year 2005. And the platform speaker was Bruce Ames, PhD, from University of California. And he is the most cited living scientist on planet Earth, because when he was a young man, he developed an assay that is used worldwide in drug development and any new organic compounds, that with his process called the Ames test, you can determine if this new compound has a propensity to cause mutations of genes, because it's mutations of genes that causes various developmental diseases in children, as well as mutations cause malignancies or cancer. Well, Dr. Bruce Ames made a major thing to say in his virtually 20 years of published research that he wanted to announce a new field of nutraceutical research. And he gave at least nearly an hour of series of experiments that had been published that proved that nutrition influences gene expression. There was no question. And he says more science needs to be done on this. And I don't know whether you can hear the echo from the ancient Hebrew scriptures and the New Testament in terms of those original empiric statements that nutrition influences gene expression. And of course, it's gene expression that controls cellular synthesis of bioactive molecules, of hooking together all these elements to make the biochemistry and physiology of life. Now, Dr. Ames was followed by an hour by Stephen Mutzplatz, the University of Minnesota, I believe it was. And he showed that, no question about it in the research, that optimal nutrition activates or upregulates health-promoting genes or gene expression. And a good example of this is the genetic information that is translated by cellular synthesis to make interferons, interleukins, chemokines for host defense and healing of our body. In addition, he showed, contrary to optimal nutrition, that optimal nutrition inactivates or downregulates unhealthy gene expression. An example of that would be the changes in the biochemistry of the DNA that I've been showing you, the code of life in the chromosomes, that is changed to necessary to make carcinogenesis, to make malignant cells. Now, again, I want to point out that in our public schools and in universities, and it's been spread on and on, that claim giants of science, that the fathers of all of medicine and science were a bunch of either agnostics, atheists, or minimally free thinkers with no interest in the spiritual matters or belief in the deity. And if you have any question about this, this is why the Ten Commandments have been removed from the walls of federal courts, that statues of Moses with the Ten Commandments have been removed from public buildings, and that in public schools, many of them no longer have any prayers, or they ban any studies of the King James Version of the Bible or any of its other translations. Now, the reason I mention this is because I'd like to quote from Nikola Tesla that we pointed out, and I want to share this quote by this so-called atheist. His quote was, "The gift of mental power comes from God, a divine being. If we concentrate our minds on that truth, we become in tune with this great power. My mother taught me to seek all truth in the Bible." That's from Tesla, that is misquoted and said to not believe that there is a creative, organizing, designing power in the universe. Now, Charles Darwin, the author of the text, the book that is so often quoted as being his contribution that there is no divine power, is quoted saying that life is a being due to such powerful and full of knowledge as God, which created the universe, is in our finite minds omnipotent and omniscient, and revolts our understanding to suppose that his benevolence is not unbounded. I have the view that all organic beings have been developed through variation and natural selection. And when we speak of Charles Darwin, in my travels to lecture in now 15 different countries, I had a luncheon in United Kingdom with current living family members of Darwin. And I have to tell you, one of the reasons they wanted to meet with me was to tell me that they are all antagonistic and bent out of shape, that Charles Darwin is quoted as being an atheist by these people that control our education in the United States. They said that Charles Darwin was a cornerstone of their local Presbyterian church, that he taught a men's Bible class, and that his travels and his book was his search for how God did all this activity in nature, of the plant kingdom and the animal kingdom, and it was a search on his part of how in the world this creative, organizing, designing power of the universe did all of this. And they really antagonistic that he's quoted as being a big atheist. Also, I'd like to quote again that some of the scientists that are influential up to this day of our modern laws of physics and mathematics is that Sir Isaac Newton, who was involved in original calculus in defining the laws of physics, he said, quote, and it was in Latin, "The purpose of science is to understand the mind of God." Quite an unusual statement for a man quoted to be an atheist. He went on further to say this most beautiful system of the sun, planets, and comets could only proceed from the counsel and dominion of an intelligent and powerful being. And from true lordship, it follows that the true God is living, intelligent, powerful, from other perfections, that is supreme and supremely perfect. This is by Sir Isaac Newton. Now, Paracelsus, the father of Western pharmacology, said all man needs for health and healing has been provided for man by God in nature. The challenge of science is to find it. And I have a book on all the translations of Paracelsus, and in our education system to try to say he's one of the big atheists, kind of difficult when you really look into what the truth of the matter is. Now, in our modern times, and we showed the equation E equal mc squared that is particularly identified with Einstein, and this is a quote from Einstein. In view of such harmony in the cosmos, which I, with my limited human mind, am able to recognize, there are yet people who say there is no God. But what really makes me angry is when they quote me for support of such views. And he ends with saying, God does not play dice with the universe. And so I have attempted to go from ancient wisdom taught by the Mayan priests here in North and Central and South America that is in harmony with their observations with also the Hebrew prophets and founding scientists through the ages. And I hope that you realize that I started out in 1985 working with the Food and Drug Administration with middle of the road modern science and scientific methodology, and that this has turned into what I would call virtually a spiritual journey, because I came to realize that all that our genes call for in the animal kingdom have been provided in abundant and also in very trace amounts in some things like omega-3 fatty acids are very low in the plant kingdom, and you really have to eat nuts on a regular basis to even get any of them. But that in the plant kingdom, what our genes in the animal kingdom call for to make the compounds to carry on biochemistry of life were provided. And the next thing that hit me was such a surprise that the DNA or nucleic acids in the plant kingdom are exactly in function, just like the genes in the animal kingdom. And that raises a question: if you're creating life to start out, why would you start totally over and have a totally different way of doing it? So, as I say, this has turned into a spiritual journey. And in fact, with more comprehensive nutrition that we have been able to put in New Eden by our research of finding molecules that are low or absent or not present in the modern food chain, that you can restore what the genes are programmed to have good health. And we have been amazed that we have had reported to us over 800 different deviations from normal health. I don't use any disease terms. I just say we are supplying through nutrition molecules used in the biochemistry and synthesis of life, which is all normal physiology and biochemistry. We're providing nutrient molecules that used to be abundant in family gardens and orchards and in the plants of that time, and that this has turned into what I would call a validation of the ancient wisdom that something very powerful is creative, organizing, and designing power in the universe to control and make possible human life and health. With that, I end this lecture, and I hope it means something to you, that you realize that by adding this to your diet, you can prevent deviations from normal health, and you can restore the biochemistry and the physiology of health back to the normal zone with more comprehensive nutrition. With that, we will wait for the next time we get together.